Okay, calm down.
How did each of you become anti-Zionists?
In terms of how I became an anti-Zionist, well, I traveled throughout the Middle East or West Asia, which is I like to refer it as, on my own a couple of years ago, and I actually went to both Israel and the West Bank. And I want to say that as I traveled throughout the region, I was by myself as a gay person, and I felt very safe the entire time. I just want to put it out there. Um, I went to the West Bank as a very unconscious person. I just was like, "Hey, I don't know what this is all about. What's Palestine all about?" Like, I've heard not nice things, but I've had good experiences so far in the region. Let's go check it out. And while I was making my way through the security crossing, I happened to stand next to another American who was a graduate student studying like Middle Eastern studies or something like that. And he spoke Arabic. I didn't. He said, "Hey, when we get to Ramallah, do you want to share a cab with me? Like we can hire a cab driver, and he'll just drive us around to different parts of the West Bank." And I said, "Yeah, great, let's do it." So while we were driving with this Palestinian cab driver, he was just explaining everything to us, and he was like, "Oh, you see this hill with these beautiful new houses? That's an Israeli settlement. That's actually where I grew up, but they bulldozed all of our homes, and they put this new settlement, and we're not allowed there." And so I was like, "Wait, what?" Like I honestly didn't know this at all because we're not told this in the news or in school. Um, and I remember driving on different roads, and then the cab driver said like, "Oh yeah, you see this zone, like where I'm not allowed here, but we're allowed here." I remember the checkpoints as well. There was IDF soldiers who would stop the car and said, "Hey, I need everybody to show me your IDs." And it was just very militarized and very just it felt like you were in jail being in Palestine. And it was really going there myself that I was like, wow, like everything I've learned about Palestine was a lie, and I need to go back to the US and tell people the truth about what I saw. So that was my personal journey, and if folks have a chance to go, I recommend doing that and seeing it for yourself.
Torres said the same thing, right, about why he's a Zionist, is he said something like, I'm a Zionist because I've been there and I've seen it myself. But the question I wanted to ask him is, well, have you been to Palestine? Have you been to Ramallah? Have you been to Gaza? Have you actually seen it with your own two eyes? And, I think, to hear Richie speak to that is really important. My own background is that, as I've mentioned earlier, I'm a dual citizen, Israeli and American, and most of my family does live in Israel. My father's parents migrated from Kurdish Iraq in 1936 to Palestine and joined the Jewish agency and joined the Jewish state building effort. And my grandfather participated in the war in 48 and committed the Nakba. And I was raised as a fairly nominal American Zionist with this extra asterisk of I'm also Israeli. So my Zionist upbringing was fairly complete. And I guess I like to say that I became anti-Zionist because I started learning from Palestinians. And it's been many, many years of my life now. Most of my life has been a journey out of Zionism into proud anti-Zionism. And I work with journalists in the Gaza Strip now with an organization called the 16th October Media Group, with a journalist named Wafa Al-Yudaini, who 80 days into genocide is still reporting, is still on the ground taking pictures. And for me, as somebody who has Israeli citizenship, as somebody who was raised in these communities, my anti-Zionism is really as much about fighting back against the Israeli assault on Palestinian livelihood as it is about what it has done to my community. And to watch people that I've grown up with people that I've loved deeply go down a genocidal, spiral has always been something that radicalizes me just as much as witnessing the violence. I think both sides. I watch parents mourn over their children. I watch children mourn over their parents, and it breaks my heart. And then I watch people gleefully cheer for it, and it breaks my heart and enrages me, and it pushes me to want to disrupt and want to shut down and want to put an end to these things. And I don't want to say because it's in my name, I happen to have all of these intersecting identities that are right there, but I don't think that one must be Jewish or must be Palestinian or must be Muslim or must be have any kind of affiliation with the region what at all to care about Palestine because apartheid is a human issue. And so while I'm always happy to speak, that's what I really hate about what Richie Torres does, the way he weaponizes his identities, because I could easily weaponize my identities and feel often compelled to be like, but I'm also an Israeli and I oppose the apartheid, but it's not an identity issue at all. And I think that even this dialectic of appealing to identity is another way of distracting from the fact we are 80 days into genocide. We have no idea how many people have actually been killed because it's impossible to count. And we have no idea what the future is going to look like for millions of people. And so, like, these are the things that would make anybody reasonably
Right.
an anti-Zionist, regardless of your identities. And it's like, if at this point in 80 days in, you're not like, what the hell is going on? I am speechless at that. That shocks me. And I can't imagine that this has anything to do with me being Israeli or
Right.
anti-Zionist. I think this has to do with me being a human with a certain set of morals.
I totally hear that, and I also feel sometimes conflicted about saying as a Jew this, as a Jew that, but I also know that we live in a world that exists,
Yeah,
and if we don't do that, then the only people saying as a Jew are the ones who are
absolutely.
defending genocide,
Absolutely,
and
Katie.
that becomes dangerous. First of all, it's wrong, and it shows the world a warped vision of what it means to be Jewish, but let's also talk about, like, anti-Semitism. I mean,
It's so anti-Semitic. And I
yeah,
also want to speak to, actually, I just want to speak about an essay that was written by the murdered Dr. Rafat El-Arir, who published a series of essays. This is an essay called There is No Poetry of Mass Destruction. And he discusses how he grew up until he was 36 years old. He didn't know any
right.
Jews who didn't want to kill him. And by the end of the essay, he discusses coming to America and actually living with Jews, members of Jewish Voice for Peace. And the way the essay ends is he says, I don't know what the future for Palestine is, but I leave it in the hands of my Jewish friends. And so Dr. Al-Arir believed that we did have a role to play.
Yeah.
And I believe that we do. And I mean, I've been sitting here yelling from the fringe or whatever for however long I've been here. And I have seen people move and move and move. And so I believe that maybe sometimes people do need to hear it from various different voices, but we're always centering Palestinian voices. We're always learning from Palestinians first and leading in that way. We're letting Palestinians lead in that way. And I think that we just have to maintain the balance. And so I will say, like, I'm Jewish, but at the same time, I'm taking my lead from Dr. Al-Arir, who is a friend of mine and whose murder I lament and
Yeah.
will rage against my whole life.
Yeah, we had him on my other show, and, um,
Tragic.
yeah, tragic and infuriating, and I did a special with some of his former students too.
But I think a lot of my, I guess, realization and sometimes radicalization of my politics almost always came from elders. So when I first walked into an ACT UP room, I knew I was in the right place, and eventually, found who I was supposed to be and who I was supposed to be with. And
Can you
I,
just explain for people what ACT UP is in case they don't know?
Yeah, so ACT UP is the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power. and was formed in March 1987 to fight the AIDS crisis with direct action. And I think a lot of our models, even with a lot of work that JVP is doing, is replicating in that way as well, about some of the action, even down to the actions that they did, such as the Grand Central Action, which was replicated from the Day of Desperation. But I think a lot like Ilana. I'm a suburban Jew from Long Island that was indoctrinated with a lot of Zionism and dehumanization of Palestinians. We would go to the Israeli Day Parade, and they would shield kids from seeing counter protesters, and that's what dehumanization does and continues to do. And I think in college, where I met my first Palestinian friend and was like, but how come, why is this happening, basically, and asking those questions that I wish I asked earlier. um, and I think, to continue on to that point, it wasn't until maybe until I met Shotzi Weisberger, the late great Shotzi, where I could fully, with conviction, say I'm an anti-Zionist Jew, because she did it so eloquently and she did it with such compassion.
And she was a member of Jewish Voice for Peace, for people who don't know.
She was, and she was also on the front lines of, the women's rights movement, and the LGBT movement, and during the AIDS crisis. So I think that if anyone could speak on and along the intersections of, identity and our struggles, our collective struggles with people, it's her. So whenever I'm in the streets and whenever I think about who I want to emblem, I think about Shotzi, and I think about our ancestors that build our movement and continue to build our movement. And so that's why it was like such an honor to have, for instance, Ross Pachetsky with us, because we had a lot of youth representing us, and then we had our elders. So it was just such a multi-generational effort to speak truth to power, especially when we have such bad faith people in decision-making power. So I guess that's my journey of becoming an anti-Zionist.
And Ilana, one final question for you. You said it was through meeting Palestinians. Was there an aha moment? Like, was this in college? Was this in high school? Where did you meet the Palestinians who changed your view on this?
I mean, the very funny story is that when I was on Birthright, I was on this.
And that's a free program for people who don't know. A free
Birthright
program
is a free
for Jews
trip.
who haven't been to Israel. Although I guess you can have gone. They'll pay for you if you've only gone with your family, right?
Yeah. So Birthright is a free trip for Jewish young people. It's sponsored by the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and various different donor groups internationally. And it's targeted at college students, it's targeted at young adults. And I, having been an Israeli citizen, thought I wasn't able to go, but I did go. And it was actually the only time in my life I ever went on an actual tour of the country. Prior to that, I had only ever been with my family. So it was really not a tourist place for me. It was where my family lived. So I wasn't exposed maybe in some of the ways to some of the touristic narrative that many people were. And I went, and I kind of thought it was a ridiculous trip, but they took us on and I mean, Jason also said the first Palestinian he met was in college. This should really, really cement how much the Jewish community is shielded and intentionally segregated from Palestinians. I'm on Birthright in Israel, Palestine, on the Jordan River, on a white river rafting trip, and a raft next to us of Palestinian students paddles up, and they start talking to us. And we just speaking, they ask where we're from. We say America, New York. They're like, welcome, how long are you here? And we're having a nice time. And we go around the bend, and there are a dozen Israeli boys who are dive bombing all the rafts, and they jump on all these rafts, and they're having a good time, but they're a little aggressive. And so the next thing I know, I find myself with these like 6 Palestinian girls who are all in hijab, and we're all wearing bikinis, and we're like fighting these Israeli boys. And it's on the surface, it's just this like young people having a nice time in the summer. And then there's so many levels of like politics and intersectional like identity levels there, like Palestinian girls, American girls, Israeli boys in the Jordan River. And I've thought about that moment a lot, because I was just like, after that, I was like, they tell you on Birthright you're going to meet Israelis, and I was like, wow, I met Palestinians, this is cool. And this speaks to how racist it is in the communities. Like, they didn't hate me, which I've heard so many other like young Jews articulate when they like finally like, oh, they didn't hate me, because we're taught from a young age that the basis of Palestinian existence is hatred of Jews, which is, it's one of those things where every accusation is a confession,
Right.
because actually what is taught is hatred of Palestinians. And we see this now coming home to roost when the Jewish community is claiming that there's rising anti-Semitism everywhere, but what there's really rising is Palestinian solidarity. And the only way that you can see rising Palestinian solidarity as rising anti-Semitism is if you inherently believe that Palestine is anti-Semitism. And I believe that's what we're witnessing. And I think that, the way I was raised and the way many of us were raised, with this very deeply indoctrinated racism, this very, very violent, murderous, genocidal racism, that is fully in view now that Israel is committing genocide.